Hello folks, welcome back. This is Chris in the Eastern Cape with a member of the provincial legislature and former mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, Retief Odendaal. Retief, it's a pleasure to see you today. Hoe gaan dit?
Dit gaan baie goed. Hi Chris, it's wonderful being back with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I got to tell you something though, man, it is windy. I was in the Western Cape, people were talking about how windy it was there, and people in the Eastern Cape saying you don't know anything till you come here. And I've been here several times, but it's never been this windy. I mean, it's picking me up and lifting me. I'm over 100 kg. That's a heck of an effort. These are some strong winds you got going here.
No, absolutely. In the past we were used to known as the windy city, and these days we're trying to market ourselves as a friendly city. But the wind's still around; it hasn't gone away. Apparently, we're the fourth windiest place in South Africa, but we're also the sunniest place in South Africa. We get 300 days of sunshine, so we try and market the good stuff and not the bad stuff.
Well, we were talking before I came in here. I mentioned, wind turbines would be a good idea, except it wouldn't be a good idea because the blades would snap off all the time. So, I would also, one more thing before we talk about politics, because we're going to talk about politics. Boy, the sea looks angry here today. It just looks, it's beautiful, but it looks like it just wants to grab somebody. You got jagged rocks out here. Beautiful spot here.
No, absolutely. This is a spot called Beach View, and it's in Nelson Mandela Bay, and it's just around the wild side. So, the sea gets quite stormy here, but absolutely unwrapped and stunning.
So the Eastern Cape is one of the provinces with some of the greatest challenges in South Africa, with poverty and unemployment. You also got some pretty impressive industry in this area here at Uitenhage and in PE. You've got Volkswagen here and others. But the province really has a lot of challenges. And you were the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, which is a town that has a lot of challenges, and the province. So you've been doing this for a couple of years now. What motivates you to stick in politics? Are you trying to make a difference, or are you just a glutton for punishment?
Well, I'm an attorney by trade. I still
okay. Well, now we figured it all out. Okay. So the best place for lawyers, it's right out here in the city at the bottom of this. Anyway, sorry.
No, I'm an attorney by trade. I still practice, but you know what? In South Africa, we actually do need some professional people in politics as well, and I encourage more professionals to get involved, because at the end of the day, we really do have a lot of problems in this country. It is an amazing country with amazing potential, but badly run, with bad policies and bad laws, and therefore, it takes some good people with a backbone to stand up against those bad politicians and bad policies and legislation, and to try and steer the ship in the right direction. And I hope that's what I've been doing. My wife wants me to get out of politics, but
watch this space for new developments.
But at the end of the day, somebody's got to do it, Chris. And that's what it all comes down to.
I appreciate where you're coming from. Last year, I was encouraged by people in my community to run for the state legislature, like the provincial legislature here. I did, and I refused donations because I didn't want anybody to say that I was bought or owned by anybody, and spent far too much money in my own savings. But I lost badly.
It happens. That's politics.
Yeah, exactly. But it didn't bother me. And actually, I don't know how legislature is here, but watching our legislature, I think I'd need narcolepsy. I'd be falling asleep with some of the stuff that takes place in there. Or watching the South African Parliament, which is a little different, hopefully, than the provincial legislature. But boy, that would keep me awake. It's like a clown car show watching what happens in that place. I hope it's not the same in the provincial legislature. Is it a little spicier or less spicier here?
Bishu is our administrative city here in the Eastern Cape, where the provincial legislature is situated.
And that's where it meets at.
Yes, and I can tell you, it feels like a bit of a graveyard. I'm I'm a politician that cut my teeth in local government in the municipality, and I like that. I would really want to come back to the municipality at one or other stage. To council if I can, because local government is what matters most to people. I think there was a former speaker in the Reagan time, Tip O'Neill,
a Democrat,
and he said all politics is local. And I remind myself of that. No matter whether we've got a national election, every time the issues that comes up are local issues. People want to know whether their roads are going to be tarred. They want to know whether they're going to have water and a continuous supply of electricity. That's all that people really care about. And then, of course, employment, which is a massive problem.
Sure. But I think you and I must be drinking the same Kool-Aid, or at least the same ginger ale.
Ginger ale, yes.
Because in the build-up to the 2020 municipal elections, because I have a lot of new viewers, so they don't know this, but the original gangsters, my original viewers that know this, so I'll share it with everybody here, is because we have a very similar view on this. In the build-up to the election, I interviewed 45 candidates from 8 political parties and leaders of 6 of those parties.
Yep.
Some rather small ones, but also the leader of the IFP, Velokoni Hlabisa, when Buthelezi was still alive. And I encourage people to go vote in South Africa's municipal elections because, in my view, because your government's a little different than ours, your governance. My rubbish is picked up by a private contractor whom I pay, my communications are to a private company whom I pay, my electricity is to a private company. The only thing I get from the municipality is law enforcement, and I only get fire services because we have volunteer firemen.
Oh, really?
So we raise money for them and buy the equipment for them. But I mean, most of our services are delivered from the private sector, so we don't rely on government. But that's not the story in South Africa. And you don't get those things from the national government, the provincial government, you get it from your municipality. So I told people, I said, you need to go vote, because what you should do is vote for the party that has the best chance of getting an outright majority in a municipality. And I used the story of Athol Trollop and the DA when he was the mayor, and how that whole thing was scuppered and the constant attacks on his government. And he spent a lot of his time in a rearguard action trying to keep the government together until he was finally ousted. So my point there was that that's because you had to have a coalition. But if you had 50+1 for a political party, then you could govern. You can invite people to your coalition, but you wouldn't have to worry about those votes. You know, you could work with them, but you could govern. And in 2021, the reason I mention this is because a lot of people lately have been saying that I'm a known enemy of the DA. I'm a known DA hater. I don't know where that comes from. That's just fictitious. It's bogus. In 2021, and you can look at the digits, you can look at the proof, the receipts, I actively encourage people to vote for the DA. Even though I'm not a DA supporter or a DA opponent, I was, from a pragmatic standpoint, trying to help South Africans get other political parties in charge of municipalities so people could see the roads repaired, the police responding, fire services, things like that. So it sounds like we kind of agree that that's the most important. You talk about Tip O'Neill and all politics is local.
Absolutely. And, you know, very sad thing is that people, South African voters as a whole, have really become very apathetic. So you don't really...
31% turnout in that election.
Yes, it was absolutely pathetic. I don't know if it was that low, but it was quite low. And in many of our wards, in Nelson Mandela Bay, I mean, we got less than 50% turnout, and at the end of the day, we got a horrific result in Nelson Mandela Bay, where we could only govern through a coalition, and the DA and the ANC got about a similar percentage, about around 40%, and they put together a coalition with smaller parties which collapsed. We then put a coalition together which I led as the mayor. There were 10 parties to that coalition. You know,
sounds a lot like the GNU.
You can't
10 parties.
You can't govern with a 10-party coalition.
That's
you've got knives against your throat every day.
Every day.
And that coalition then eventually collapsed, as we thought it would inevitably. And now there's a new ANC coalition, yet again with about 7 or 8 parties. So really a difficult electoral result that we got here, and that just highlights how important it is for people to go out and vote. And what we've seen here was the rise of a number of small political parties. Some political parties getting 1,500, 2,000 votes in a 1.3 million metro, and then getting a seat in council.
Yeah, that's crazy.
We've got no threshold here, and that's something that we are looking at introducing at a national level legislation. So there's a threshold for.
Well, the Germans, in order to get a seat in the Bundestag, you have to have 5%.
Yes, yeah.
And in fact, so the Free Democrats, who are a liberal party, they don't have a seat now because they didn't get the 5% threshold this time. But I mean, they've been in government for decades, and as part of coalitions, kind of the kingmaker a lot of times in the past. And in fact, one of their most famous foreign ministers, Germany, was Hans-Dietrich Genscher, who was from the Free Democrats. But no, it's that 5% threshold, because you wind up, and I'm not making comparison to Nazi Germany, but you wind up with a situation like 1933, where someone like Hitler, with just 33% of the vote, was able to take over the government because of all this plethora of parties. There was no threshold, and there were so many. It was so fractious, you couldn't form a proper government. I mean, there's a risk of that when you have a plurality party that has to rely on so many coalition partners.
No, absolutely, and here specifically, but also elsewhere in other metropolitan municipalities like Johannesburg and Tshwane, you've seen, which is Pretoria, you've seen small parties that got a fraction of the vote
Al Jamaa in Joburg
becoming the kingmakers, and then they demand the seat of the
deputy
mayoral
mayor
seat,
or the mayor seat,
or the mayor seat, and it's nonsensical. That's not the will of the people. That can't be, and therefore we have to look at the legislation. I think it's about high time. We should have done that a long time ago.
I agree. I mean, I don't have a vote in this. I'm not South African, but I do agree with that. The one thing about this is, I mean, let's go back to that election 2021. I imagine you were in municipal government at that time. It had to be a deeply disappointing result. I was a little surprised because I didn't have data to show what was going on in the wards, but I thought the DA would hold its own, but it lost seats, and and I hoped it gained a few seats for an outright majority so that one party could rule. And then let me ask you about your time as mayor, okay? Was it a daily struggle? I mean, just because you have to satisfy so many people, but really you're trying to satisfy the constituents, the residents, but then you've got political parties demanding things from you. That must have been difficult.
It was very, very difficult. I think the best way I can describe it is trying to run a government with one hand tied behind your back. And the city had a lot of problems. As I've said, it's about 1.3 million. Yes, about 1.3 million people. And I took over towards the end of September 2022, which was a couple of days before the end of the first quarter. Now, just to give you an indication of how broken the administration was, that by the end of the first quarter, the city only managed to spend 1% of its total capital budget because of an inability to get the administration going. So it really was in dire straits. The city was also threatened by quite an intense drought at that stage. Yes. Everybody thought that we were going to become the first metropole that were going to run dry. So we had to take difficult decisions. For example, the previous government never curtailed their water abstraction from the dams. So I had to make a call, and I listened to advice from the professionals, and I said stop over extracting from the dams, which meant that on a daily basis we left 300,000 people without water. But we had to do that because the alternative was that we were going to run dry. So what we did was water shedding. Yeah. And some of our dams went down to about 3 to 4%, but at the same time we also accelerated our drought mitigation and water augmentation projects to try and get them done as quickly as possible. And we averted disaster, and we didn't reach day zero, but we had to take difficult decisions to reach that point in order to prevent that disaster. I did not appoint somebody to manage the finances politically. I did that myself in the mayor's office, But
that was your option. You chose not to do it.
Yes, I chose not to do it because I understand municipal finances or South African government finances quite well, and we managed to get the projects going quite quickly, and we achieved record spend in that financial year. But more importantly, and something which I'm very proud of, we also achieved an unqualified audit.
You passed your audit.
Yes, the first one in 12 years. So it just shows that if you pay attention to good governance, and let me also just say the city wasn't perfect, far from it. You can't turn a broken city around within a couple of months. But if you do the right things, the ship will move in the right direction. The very sad thing is we were removed, and in the very next year the city got a qualified audit again. So that was very, very sad, and again lost hundreds of millions of rands to national treasury, to the national fiscus, because they couldn't spend it. And that's so sad in a city that's got one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. We can ill afford sending any money back to the national fiscus because we can spend it in any community in Nelson Mandela Bay. It's so desperately needed here.
Well, it's ironic and sad, and I'm not sure which government was responsible for this, but a few years ago, as I recall, there was money meant for infant and child feeding programs, and the money wasn't spent. It was turned back to the national government, and media reported like 15 infants and small children starved to death This is a few years back. I mean, I guess that kind of illustrates just how bad things can get.
Absolutely. That is sometimes how irresponsible our politicians and our officials can become. And yes, sometimes there's excuses because of it being difficult to adhere to the legislation. But you know what, I find that if you've got a problem and you can't spend money, you pick up the phone, you speak to a professional at National Treasury. There's some very good officials at national level in National Treasury, and you ask for advice. But you know, in Afrikaans, we've got a saying, somebody is slapgat, meaning that essentially they don't really care. And I think very often that's the problem. Our public servants need to understand that they're in service to the public. And this attitude...
public servant.
Yes.
It's in the title.
It's exactly what it says. And this attitude of entitlement and sometimes blatant ignorance of the suffering of people need to come to an end. I mean, if nobody is conscripted into being a public servant, if you don't want to be there, if you want to be in the private sector, go, leave. Yes, absolutely. That's a brilliant Afrikaans word. And get somebody that can do the job and actually has a heart for people, because that's what you need as a public servant.
Well, I want to talk to you briefly about water. Before I do, my first tour back to South Africa after the COVID events in 2022, I spoke at the Reformation Society in Rondebosch, which I do on every trip. But Dr. Peter Hammond asked me, he said, what subject do you want to speak about? Because he asked me to speak. And I'm thinking, you asked me to speak. You want me to give you a title? So I thought about it, and after what had just happened in COVID, I said that, doing what's right, moral, and just is a challenge in the face of injustice. And that became the theme. And I think that's a standard that public servants should deal with, and they should take that as their ethos, doing what's right, moral, and just all the time.
Absolutely.
And then you can't go wrong.
Yes.
You can't go wrong. All right, so I want to talk to you, ironically, as we sit here with the waves crashing against the south coast, although we're in the Eastern Cape, it is the south coast of South Africa. Confusion, geography, anyway. But waves crazy, and these are, I'll tell you what, if I was a surfer, man, I'd probably have a great day out there, but I'd probably wipe out. But anyway, with all this water in the Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean meeting down here, right in front of us, trillions and trillions and billions of gallons of water out there, water is a problem in South Africa. Only 13% of the land is arable. And you had the Cape Town water crisis a few years back. People attributed to climate change. No doubt climate played a role, but mismanagement plays a role too. There was no brown water reuse policy in Cape Town. An estimated 30 to 40% of the water is lost through leaky pipes that haven't been replaced or repaired for decades. You have the tragedy at Commons where you have a public tap, like in Kailicha, and it's left on. Guys washing cars, they just leave it running instead of turning it off. Not to pick on the car washers, but that's just an example. There are a whole lot of things, in my view, that contribute to it. And then the failure of recognition of what's going on. Now, you don't have the same population base here, but Cape Town had 800,000 residents a century ago. Plenty of water. They built lots of reservoirs. Now they've got 4 million people. And consuming water in 2025 as a Homo sapien is not the same as consuming water 120 years ago, because we all take showers, we have industrial use, we use lots more water per person than before. So the use of water is exponentially larger than it was a century ago. That was never considered either. So to me, the water issue wasn't just a climate thing, it's mostly mismanagement. Now, I watched here because Grahamstown and PE had very dire water circumstances and got very little press. People didn't, I guess it's not sexy to talk about Nelson Mandela Bay. It's sexy to talk about Cape Town because that's where tourists are at in droves from Europe. But it's ironic, all this water, but you don't get enough water here. Now, there's been a lot of rain of late. How's the water situation? Are your reservoirs filling up now finally?
So I think I just want to say that what we had here, it wasn't intense drought. It was a 1 in 100 year drought, but it was a man-made crisis. Because
that's the point I'm trying to make with Cape Town.
Absolutely. We we lost in the region of nearly 50% of all the water coming into the city due to mismanagement, leaks, the water being unaccounted for. We don't know where it goes. And it highlights the fact that government has not been progressive in focusing on maintenance and repairs. Now, we must understand that South Africa, obviously, post-apartheid, trying to address the shortage of infrastructure in a poor
underdeveloped areas that were neglected during
It's a
apartheid.
poor community.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, that's also where politicians invest, because it's always sexy. You know, they like to cut ribbons of new halls and roads, and
Soccer fields,
all those things. But politicians don't really like to invest in things that you can't see. You know,
because they don't get any credit for that.
Yes, absolutely. But that's where you have to invest. And sadly, I think that it's really come back to bite us all over the country. I believe that we were far worse affected than Cape Town. Cape Town has really done a lot to try and prevent a similar disaster from happening again, and exponentially they've now invested in repairs and maintenance. And in fact, I think that they've just tabled a budget that will see over the next 3 years more money pumped into infrastructure than all the other metros combined, which tells you that the other metros are not realizing the big problem that they are faced with. But I want to use an example. Johannesburg, for example, has got a water crisis as we speak, not because they haven't got bulk water. They've got enough bulk water, but they can't get the water into the taps. And it's estimated that that they've got a backlog in water infrastructure maintenance of about 67 billion rand.
Ouch.
And Joburg is bankrupt. They've got no ability to invest in that infrastructure or to go and borrow that money. And every day in Johannesburg there's about 500,000 people sitting without water because they haven't got the ability to get. Rand Water doesn't have the ability to get the water into the taps. Now, here we prevented a disaster, and I want to tell you that there's a lot of people that don't believe in prayer, but I believe in prayer, and I can tell you I spent my days on my knees praying that the city wasn't going to run dry, but I also did take difficult decisions, and personally became the spokesperson for the city on drought-related affairs, and as I said, took very difficult decisions, and one of them being the implementation of a water services master plan, which will dictate over the next 10 years.
Wait a second. So what you're talking? You had a vision.
Yes, because
not a vision of heaven, but you have vision looking forward.
Yes, that's what politicians are supposed to be doing.
That's what leaders do.
Yes.
In the army, that's what we do. We anticipate problems 3, 5, 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
So that's what you were doing.
Absolutely.
And you were thrown out of government for it.
Sad. Because I also did the
Politics.
other problematic thing, and that is try and stop the taps of wasteful government expenditure. And just to indicate to you that the motion of no confidence in our government was tabled exactly the next day after 9 officials from our electricity department were suspended for fraud and corruption. So,
Absolutely no. Is this a coincidence? Coincidence, folks. These things happen.
So yeah, but anyway, and we commissioned the Water Services Master Plan because we believe that we must make sure that Nelson Mandela Bay never
Deals with this again.
Deals with this again. I mean, I was sitting at the bottom of a dam, a massive dam. That ran empty. It never ran empty in the 40 years that it existed. But I sat at the bottom of that dam, and that is scary. And then to realize that other dams have got 3 or 4% left, it really was amazing that it ran. But you know, that's why it's so important that you do plan, and you make sure that you learn from your mistakes, and you make very sure that you take a large part of your budget and you invest it in repairs and maintenance programs. You have to. You can't just build new infrastructure. You also have to maintain your existing infrastructure.
And that's been one of the problems for decades. You know, a lot of people are giving China a lot of credit for building infrastructure in Africa, and they deserve credit. They built a lot of infrastructure. But people act as if this is the beginning of time. You know, not Francis Fukuyama's the end of time, but the beginning of time. But they have short-term memory. The colonial powers built a lot of infrastructure in many places in Africa, not all. But then from the 60s on, the United States in particular, but also the German Development Agency, DFID from the UK, spent hundreds of billions of dollars building infrastructure all over Africa. The problem is it wasn't maintained. And it begins to fall apart. And to quote Chinua Achebe, things fall apart. So it's interesting to see China getting all the credit when we built all the infrastructure for 30, 40 years. Anyway, but apparently Julius Malema thinks America is an enemy of Africa. That's why I had to mention we built the infrastructure. But Retief, let me ask you this. Okay, we're going to wrap up here because I think you want to go surfing. You want to go surfing that water?
No, definitely not.
That's crazy. That's suicide. But seriously, you know, a lot of bad things are happening. To quote President Trump, whether it's true or not is not germane. But South Africa, it's a tough row to hoe right now for people, regardless of your circumstances. Unless you're an uber wealthy billionaire, things are challenging with crime, with power, with employment. So, as a politician that's working here in the Eastern Cape, in one of the most challenging provinces, do you have maybe a message of hope, or something to hold on to, or do you have one? I mean, if you don't, that's okay. But I'm trying to bring good news to people, so I'm struggling, and maybe you've got something good for us to talk about.
Imagine this:
okay,
that you have a country which is absolutely spectacular in natural beauty. One of the most moderate climates in the world, and really a nice place to live, and really some wonderful people that actually get along.
Yeah, amazing.
Quite
people.
well, amazing people, friendly people. South Africans very friendly.
Oh, yeah, they are indeed, and a wealth of minerals.
A wealth of minerals, very
human capital.
A country with so much potential, and the only thing that holds us back is a bad government, bad politicians, bad legislation, bad policies. And if we can sort out, you can sort out a bad government, you can sort out bad law, you can sort out bad policies. If we can get that right, this country can be a country of milk and honey, and it would be the most amazing place to live in the world.
For everybody.
For absolutely everybody. And the reality is that is why I do what I do, because I believe that we can turn this country around. Yes, we've got many problems, but if we do if we take the difficult decisions and we do the right things, we can turn it around, and we can turn it around for everybody. And this country can realize its full potential. And believe you me, though a lot of people might think that it is very dangerous to live in South Africa, and it is in certain areas, we still have a lifestyle here that is second to none in the world. And I've traveled, not extensively, but I've traveled abroad on a couple of occasions, and experienced some other countries, and really come home every time. And I'm thankful for what we have here, and that's why it's worth fighting for, and why it's worth sorting out the politicians with bad ideas and bad agendas and the bad legislation.
Well, I think that's a good note to end it on. So, Retief Odendaal, member of the provincial legislature, former mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. Bye, donkey, for your time. It's always a pleasure. Good to see you here in the Eastern Cape.
Wonderful having you here.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.